Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. The temporary reduced rate for the tourism and hospitality sectors came into effect on the 15th of July 2020 and is helping to support the cash flow and viability of over 150,000 businesses and to protect 2.4 million jobs across the UK. On the 24th of September, the government announced that it will extend the temporary reduced rate so that it now ends on the 31st of March 2021.
Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we all want to see a sensible solution to the debate over COVID restrictions in Greater Manchester. But a move from Tier 2 means that the hospitality sector in Cheadle faces the additional blow of Tier 3 restrictions. And whilst reduced VAT in recent months has been welcome, businesses in Tier 3 will be unable to benefit from the extended scheme. Therefore, in addition to the comprehensive support package, will the Minister consider extending the reduced VAT scheme further in areas that go into Tier 3 so that they can do business on that basis for as long as those businesses in other parts of the country?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. She will know it has already been extended, and as she'll also be aware, we've put in place a scheme for people who have VAT debt in order to allow a payment process that fits their schedule. As the Chancellor's already said, in order to support local authorities at very high alert to protect public health and local economies, an additional £5 a head, £8 in total has been made available. That means we have committed up to £465 million in funding for English local authorities through the tiering scheme, and we will announce further details of the eligible expenditures under this scheme.
Stephen Timms.
Question 19, Speaker.
The £20 per week increase in the Universal Credit Standard Allowance and Working Tax Credit Basic Element forms just one part of a package of support the Government has provided to protect people's jobs and incomes, including income support schemes.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government was right to increase Universal Credit and Working Tax Credit by £20 a week. It would surely now be inconceivable to remove those increases before the pandemic is even over in April as planned. But does the Minister accept that amongst the indirect levers available to the Government to stimulate what is, as we've heard already, going to be a weak economy for some time, measures which raise the incomes of low-income households are the most effective, and benefit increases are a very good example?
Well, I'm grateful that the Right Honourable Gentleman recognises the additional £9 billion of support that my Right Honourable friend has put into the welfare, and I think that is reflected, as he further recognised, in the distribution analysis that has shown that that has protected those on the lowest incomes. Now, that support is temporary, but it does extend to the spring, and it helps those families facing COVID with the challenges over the coming months.
We have a substantive question to Minister Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer this question together with the following question, which I think is question number 21. The Government has provided an unprecedented package of support for people, businesses and public services throughout the UK, totalling more than £200 billion. This is including helping to pay the wages of 9.6 million people through the Job Retention Scheme and protecting the livelihoods of 2.6 million self-employed workers through the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme.
Let's head to Scotland with Alan Dorrans. Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Scottish Government are doing what they can to support individuals, businesses and those who have been excluded by the Chancellor from receiving any grants, loans or payment holidays. They are hampered in doing so by not having the autonomy of having borrowing powers to meet the unique requirements of the Scottish economy. Will the Government heed repeated calls for the devolution of borrowing powers to enable the Scottish Government to provide additional targeted assistance to those individuals and sectors which they have identified as most in need?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Honourable Gentleman will know, the current state of affairs was agreed between the Scottish Government and the UK Government after exhaustive consultation and discussion by the Silk Commission, and that remains the set-up to which the Scottish Government has committed itself.
I said, and return to Scotland with Douglas Chapman. Douglas Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the dual viruses of Brexit and COVID-19, we're heading for a winter of discontent and a longer period of mass unemployment. With no budget announcement, what are the Chancellor's economic advisers telling him about the government's preparations for mass unemployment and the sectors that will be worst hit?
Well, the Chancellor's been very clear that because we are in the midst of a pandemic, we are likely, and we are indeed already seeing some redundancies. And there's no doubt about the seriousness of the financial and economic situation that we're in. I would remind the Honourable Gentleman with regard to Scotland that there has been some £7 billion of support for the Scottish Government in dealing with the pandemic and the economic effects of the pandemic over and above the £21.3 billion provided through the regular Barnett process.
Can I welcome to the dispatch box Abena Pongasari's Shadow Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In regions facing Tier 3 restrictions, many businesses have been forced to close. In Tier 2 regions, many businesses, especially in hospitality, are open in name only, running up all the costs without the customers. What does the government have to say to those businesses which realistically can't operate, are not legally required to close?
Well, I welcome the Honourable Lady to her place, and I mourn the loss of her predecessor to his new job, whom I happily fenced over many sessions of the Finance Bill. The answer to the question the Honourable Lady raises is, of course, that we are acutely aware of the financial costs on those businesses, as we are on businesses that have been forced to close. And that is why we have put in place an evolving and comprehensive programme of support for business.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Bartley. Minister Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hold regular discussions with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State. The original national business grant schemes provided support to small businesses which face fixed property-related costs during the strict lockdown period.
Let's head to Edmonton with Kate Osmore. Kate Osmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his reply. But is the Minister aware that in Enfield only 189 small businesses received the discretionary grant, even though 330 businesses applied for the grant? In view of further restrictions in London, will the Minister commit to urgently releasing extra funding to Enfield Council to ensure that those businesses who previously missed out can reapply for financial support?
Mr. Speaker, the previous grant was for businesses that have been forced to close, and we have allocated, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor has allocated additional funding through the Local Restriction Support Grant Scheme for those businesses that are forced to close with an additional £1,500 per 2-week closure period. But as she said in her question, the previous grant was discretionary and local authorities therefore had discretion as to how many firms benefited from it.
Andrew Lowe.
Question 24, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer this question together with the following 3 questions. The government's taken unprecedented steps to support the self-employed, as the House will be aware. So far, the government has paid out £13.4 billion of support through the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme.
Andrew Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently had a Zoom call with Deborah Annetts, the COO of the Incorporated Society of Musicians, and Jordan and Steve from a local Northampton band called The Keepers, and they highlighted the problems that self-employed musicians currently face. Can my honourable friend support struggling musicians like The Keepers by considering either a freelance support scheme or a box office top-up to help make socially distanced gigs feasible?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he'll be aware that with a name like Jesse Norman, who, as you know, is an American opera singer, now alas dead, of the same name, and as someone who's been involved in arts organisations and indeed as a pretty incompetent musician himself, I'm extremely aware of the concern that he raises, and rightly so. He will know that the government has announced a £1.57 billion culture recovery fund, of which some £330 million have been awarded to date to nearly 2,000 cultural organisations. And that funding is designed to help performances to restart, to protect jobs and to create opportunities for freelancers across the country. It's worth also mentioning that we've done a considerable amount of work on the film and TV production restart scheme, much of which will have the same effect when it's properly up and running.
Chris Elmore.
Speaker, I've been contacted every day from sole traders and small independents who have fallen through the government's schemes, they are excluded and do not qualify for government support. And according to Excluded UK, 1.6 million people are excluded from any of the government self-support schemes. Now, last week, in answer to my honourable friend, the member for Pontypridd, the Chief Secretary said these people had now been covered. They haven't been covered. These people are excluded. They are desperate for help. Can the Minister set out what support he'll provide to the people who are excluded in this country from self-support grants?
I'm sure that whatever the Chief Secretary said last week, he was absolutely correct. I would say this, that he will be aware that the scheme we have is designed to be as comprehensive as we can make it, consistent with the wider package we're offering and with support rapidly for the largest number of the most vulnerable people. That was the purpose of the scheme, and we have continued that theme of supporting the self-employed through the job support scheme, and of course it itself forms part of a much wider pattern of support for the industry and for businesses.
John Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I very much welcome everything that the Chancellor has done to protect jobs, businesses and livelihoods in my own constituency and across Scotland. Many of the self-employed constituents in my area will be very grateful for the third grant that's now available to them. I wonder if the Minister could set out the number of people who will be eligible for this grant in Scotland.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. We're unable to predict the exact take-up of the SEISS grant extension across the United Kingdom, but the latest statistics on the second grant demonstrate that self-employed people in Scotland are continuing to receive unprecedented levels of support under the scheme. As of the 20th of September, 64% of assessed individuals were found to be eligible in Scotland, with 126,000 claims being made, amounting to £318 million of government support.
Thank you, Mr
Speaker. My constituent Rebecca launched her new business, Purdy Pet Shop, in Coventry North West just before the lockdown. Rebecca was told she was ineligible for the self-employed support scheme and faced a frustrating few weeks until they were eventually granted a coronavirus business interruption loan. They are just one business amongst many who fell through the gaping holes of the first self-employed support scheme. Now, they and many other businesses in my constituency will also fall through the gap of the new extension. I also have constituents contacting me about how anxious they feel and how they can survive now that the support has dropped to just 70%. So could the Minister please tell me how adequate he believes the extension of the self-employment income support scheme is, and what he will do to support my constituents who are falling through the gap of the current scheme and worried about the reduced financial support it now offers?
Well, I thank the woman very much for her question, and I salute her constituent for setting up a new business and for showing that entrepreneurship and aspiration that characterises British business at its best. We are, as she will be aware, engaged in the process of supporting vulnerable businesses and people, and we do so in the self-employment area through the extension to the job support scheme. And of course, she will know that that just forms itself one element of a much wider picture, including the loans that she's described, tax deferrals, rental support, and increased levels of universal credit.
The PAC, Meg Heather.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I associate myself with the concerns raised by colleagues cross-party on this issue. But it's interesting that every time the Minister comes to the dispatch box, he bats off extra support for these people. And yet some of them may have qualified for bounce-back loans. I'd be very interested to know if the Treasury knows how many qualify for bounce-back loans, because a recent National Audit Office report suggests that the Treasury doesn't know where the money's gone and what it's being used for. So perhaps he can elucidate.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for, and I admire her ingenuity for introducing a conversation about bounce-back loans into a discussion of self-employed scheme. The answer to that is that I don't have the numbers to hand, but of course, if those numbers are available, I will make sure that that we write to her with the detail.
Number
29, please.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to answer this question together with question number 30, if I may. Over the course of the CGRS, over 9 million jobs were protected through the furlough scheme. The job support scheme, which replaces this, will come into force on November 1st. Of course, it's impossible to predict today how many people will benefit. That will depend on the exact path of the virus and the restrictions in place.
Mr Speaker, since March, unemployment has doubled in Coventry South, and now the government is replacing furlough with an utterly inadequate job support scheme. Research from the IPPR found that of the 2 million jobs at risk, it will only save 10%. And where it's used by businesses that are required to close, 2/3 of wages is simply not enough for low-paid workers. So I ask the Chancellor, is he happy to see 1.8 million jobs go? And could he live on 2/3 of the minimum wage? If not, he should extend the furlough scheme now for the industries that desperately need it.
Mr. Speaker, when we announced the job support scheme, it was in fact warmly welcomed by several business groups and indeed the trade union, who I was happy to work with in designing the scheme. But I'd say to the honourable member, I take the issue of jobs very seriously. It remains my highest priority, and whilst I cannot protect every single job, we will throw absolutely everything we can at protecting and saving and creating as many jobs as possible, which is why we have a comprehensive plan for jobs, Mr. Speaker. The job support scheme is just one element of that, and indeed I'm pleased to say the Kickstart scheme is shortly due to launch, which will provide hope and opportunity to hundreds of thousands of young people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report published this week by the political consultancy WPI Strategy, commissioned by Tesco, ranked Bradford West number 3 in its need to be levelled up. Last week, another report found my constituency having the highest rising rate of child poverty in Yorkshire and Humber, and the Chancellor will be well aware it also ranks 7th highest in the country for unemployment. With all of this going on and being under local restrictions for almost 3 months now, I ask the Chancellor, does he feel Bradford West can afford any more job losses, and whether he believes that it is in need of targeted support from the Treasury?
Mr. Speaker, in Bradford and elsewhere, we would like not to see any job losses. But the reality is what is happening to our economy is sadly going to mean that many people have already lost their job, almost 750,000, and sadly many more will, which is why our comprehensive plan for jobs aims to protect, support and create jobs in every part of our United Kingdom. That will provide hope and opportunity to people, whether it's the Kickstart scheme, as I mentioned, or whether it is indeed the opportunity for new training and new skills through the Prime Minister's announcement of a lifetime skills guarantee.
Imran Hamad Khan.
Number 31, sir.
The Government has provided significant support to those on low incomes. We have introduced additional support through the welfare system, estimated by the OBR to be worth over £9 billion this year, including increasing universal credit and working tax credit by £20 per week, as well as £500 million of local authority hardship fund and £500 payments for those on low-income households who have to self-isolate.
Imran Hamad Khan.
Over the weekend, I visited numerous businesses in Horbury, such as the Green Berry and the Black Olive Delicatessen. Mr. Speaker, they form a fantastic independent retail offering, which, perhaps on your next visit to Wakefield to witness Trinity prevail over your club, a little retail therapy could be a soothing balm on your long journey home across the Pennines. But failing your patronage, Mr. Speaker, business owners there have told me that the imposition of Tier 2 measures has sapped consumer confidence, which is the oil upon which the economy is greased. Will my honourable friend confirm he will use all his creativity to focus HMT's strategy in stimulating confidence in the consumer economy to support these businesses, and consider tax reform were it conducive to those aims?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and he's right to draw attention to the support that we've put in place, but also the challenges that remain. In his own constituency, 14,500 have benefited from the furlough scheme, 28.4 million of business grants have been made available, and £20.3 million of business rates relief has also been provided. But looking to the future, I can assure him that all Treasury ministers will be using rigorous analysis and thinking as we work with the Chancellor as we approach the next budget.
Mark Logan.
Question 32, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer this question together with the following one. The pandemic has unfolded at different pace in countries around the world, and countries have acted in a way that works best for their respective economies. In this country, as he will know, the government's put in place some 200, indeed more than £200 billion worth of support to protect people's jobs, businesses and incomes, and that is one of the most comprehensive economic responses of its kind anywhere in the world. Our goal remains to continue to protect those livelihoods, those jobs and those businesses while we allow the economy to adapt to the changing circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Britain's fiscal support outshines that of our European neighbours, but constituencies like mine have never really emerged from the economic lockdown. Employment in many businesses are being stretched, and the Mayor of Greater Manchester needs to learn from Bolton Wanderers and start playing ball. Will the Treasury constantly review the financial help on offer for those faced with Tier 3 restrictions, and indeed consider some of the ideas that were forthcoming from the Honourable Member for Cheadle in relation to VAT reduction on hospitality industry? Thank you.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and I'm delighted that he draws Bolton Wanderers into a discussion on the floor of the House of Commons, a very fine club. I would say this, he will know that we have committed almost £500 million in support to English local authorities through the tiering system. He will know that that comes on top of £300 million already allocated to local authorities for test, trace and contain activity. And I think he will also and should also be aware that there are grants of up to £3,000 per month, depending on rateable value, through the local restriction support grant, as well as the expansion that the Chancellor has recently announced, the job support scheme. All of that forms part of our comprehensive package.
As a Bolton fan, I expect better results in the future. Harriet Bolney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At the beginning of the pandemic, the OECD forecast that unemployment in the UK would rise to 9.1% by the end of this year. They've recently revised down their forecast to 5.3%. Can the Minister confirm that the Winter Jobs Plan will continue to provide the right kind of support to help our flexible labour market adapt to the pandemic?
Well, I think to highlight the point about the OECD's forecasts and also the astonishing flexibility and effectiveness of our labour markets. I think she'll know that the government continues to adapt its response, and as the Chancellor has just recently, a few minutes ago, mentioned, we will shortly be launching the £2 billion Kickstarter scheme alongside the job support scheme, and that is, I think, going to be a tremendous boost for prospects of young people across the country.
Simon Clark.